Welcome to the Workshop Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, and joining me tonight is just myself. It's been a while since I've done a solo episode. However, what with schedules and busyness and all that, was next to impossible to line up a guest for today. So I figured it's been a while since I've done a solo one. And as I was driving home from Edmonton last Tuesday, I was listening to something and it triggered some thoughts in my head that I thought I'd share. And the person was talking about these different traits that everybody has and how everybody isn't quite necessarily unique. And then the next day I was listening to somebody else, or I was watching a video actually, and the person I was watching made a comment about how a lot of people do this thing where they try to be, or when they're trying to be successful in a business or trying to differentiate themselves from the crowd, what they end up doing is they just try to be 1% better than the person on the rung below them on the ladder, right? And this other person said, maybe you're better off focused to be 10% different from the other people. And so kind of combining what the previous person I was listening to said and this other individual, I thought about the concept of leveraging your weird. So what do I mean by weird? I don't mean like, well, maybe I do mean those quirky traits that everybody thinks are strange in you, you know, like your tics or your weird sense of humor or the uncomfortable, awkward pauses that sometimes you force into a conversation. Maybe those things aren't a liability. Maybe those are actually an asset. You know, kind of conventional wisdom is to fit in, you know, tone down your strangeness, be professional, whatever. But sometimes what happens is you end up just being another generic face, right? So maybe we should stop trying to blend in and start leveraging the things that make us a little bit different. So how do we identify what's weird? You know, what's weird about you, or what are those things that are a little bit different about you that set you apart? You know, as a part of your personality, part of your perspective, your process, maybe your past experience, or maybe the whole thing. You know, there's nobody out there that has the exact same personality, same perspective, does things in the exact same way, and has lived the exact same life as you. You are a unique individual. So how do I identify those weird things? There's a few steps that maybe we can think about. You know, what do people point out that's weird in you is probably the first good step, right? If there's something that people tease you about, lean into it. Maybe there's some feedback you got from a boss or from a friend or a colleague that made you stop and think about it, or those things that made you kind of step back and go, well, maybe I shouldn't do that. Or maybe there's something that you enjoy doing that other people don't. Whatever it is, that might be your weird. Probably the most clear way of identifying your weird are what are the things that you feel comfortable doing by yourself, your most unique thing that you don't feel comfortable doing around other people because they might judge you. What's that thing? Kind of makes me think about that Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Ugly Duckling. I'm sure everybody knows it, but to give you a quick rundown about the ugly duckling, there's this little duckling that's born in this family of ducks, right? And he always stood out because he's always a little weird and he's different from the other ones. And of course, as he grows up, and eventually he discovers that he's a swan and not a duck. So the moral of this story is that the ugly duckling wasn't wrong. It wasn't weird. He was just in the wrong pond. He was in the wrong social setting, whatever that is. You know, he was just in the wrong spot. He was perfectly great, and he was successful at what he was. But until he realized that he wasn't a duckling, he wasn't a duck, he was always a little bit strange. So this brings me to why aren't we all a little weird? So I've been talking with more and more clients here recently, and I've noticed a couple things that that motivate people, and one major motivator for people to hide what they're doing or hide who they are is they fear judgment and rejection from people. There's nothing quite so motivating to people as social stigma. We also live in a culture and a world where conformity is really, really rewarded. You know, the pressure to fit in is very, very real. And probably our biology and the neuroscience of our brains kind of lead to us being or lead to us wanting to fit in and to blend in, because that's the safe route. There's so kind of give you a quick rundown, very, very simplistic idea of how your brain works. So you have your cortex, that's your higher brain, and that's the thing that that makes your decisions. That's what you use to plan things out. That's what you use to problem solve and to be proactive. And then you have the structures in your brain stem. Those control your autonomic or your reactive functions. Part of your brain stem is your amygdala. And so your amygdala, that's what controls your fear, your fight, your flight responses. So when you sense you're in danger, your amygdala is in charge of flooding your body with neurotransmitters that get you ready to fight or to fly or run away, right? And that part of your body is very, very strong. It's evolutionarily been there the longest. It's been there much longer than your cortical functions. And so it has a tremendous amount of control over your body. And so a strong survival mechanism is to not be seen. And so when you let your freak flag fly, as it were, that's putting you out of the safe zone and into the danger zone. And so your amygdala kicks in and floods your body with those stress hormones and makes it feel difficult and strange and makes you afraid of it. And so that's another reason why we tend to blend in instead of be crazy, right? Or let our weird show. But you think about it from a creative perspective, the things that really stand out aren't the things that are the same as everybody else. Cutting boards is a great example. Lots of people love making cutting boards, but and unless you see something really crazy, like there's some crazy cool end grain cutting boards out there, but for the most part, especially edge grain cutting boards, yeah, sure, there's some nice ones out there, but they're all the same, right? For woodworkers, a cutting board is a cutting board. The only thing that really differentiates them is something that's unique about them, right? The grain pattern or the way the wood is arranged to create something different than just a flat piece of wood. It's those weird things, those imperfections that make the piece stand out, that make it valuable, and not just a disposable piece of board that everybody wants to throw out. That's what makes art unique, right? Or valuable. It's not. It's the different, the difficulty, the strangeness that people value in art. Why should we take time to develop our weird? I mean, for some people, fitting in is totally fine. That's where they're happy, and to those people, more power to them. But the more I encounter it, the more I feel like people are unhappy with just fitting in. When you're suppressing part of your uniqueness, especially a part that you feel is important, that can create some real mental burden for people. And so taking time to find your weirdness and to let it free and let it be real, it really helps not only your mental state, but also your ability to uh, stand out from the crowd. And so if you're trying to do something like sell a product or get a new job or whatever, the thing that makes you unique and memorable is often the thing that is most important especially in a saturated market or a difficult market. I mean, think about the people you've interacted with, right? The people who are the weird ones are probably the ones that you remember. In a business sense, the generic guy in a suit can be exchanged for another generic guy in a suit. So one of the things that I kind of enjoy in therapy is a concept called narrative therapy, and that's it's heavily based in how we think, right? Like it tells us that the story that we tell ourselves or the narrative that we create for ourselves dictates the path that we take forward. Right. And so if you have this narrative that you've created for yourself, that you're somebody who fits in, you're somebody who goes with the flow, then you are by default creating a narrative for yourself that means that you will not stand out. You can't stand out because your narrative is one of sameness. But you think about that in a story setting. You're reading a story about some hero who does this great thing. It's quite often the flaw or the weird thing about him that makes him uniquely or her uniquely suited to overcoming this challenge that is before them, and they end up saving the world. One book that I read a long time ago, when I did my first degree, I took a course in Middle Eastern religions, so Zen, Buddhism, Shintoism, Taoism, all of these Eastern religions. And one of the books that I ran across and read, it's one of those famous ones that lots of people have heard about, but it's The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And I don't know if I said that right, but anyway, The Art of War. And in there, he describes a way to strategically outmaneuver your enemy, which is kind of the point of the art of war. But I think it applies here. And what he says is, the rough translation is, appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend and march swiftly to places where you are not expected. So the basic concept is, show up where the enemy expects you to distract them, but make sure that you're attacking really where they're not expecting you. So kind of diversionary tactics, right? So your weird is that unexpected thing that disrupts somebody's assumptions. And so why this is important is because if somebody's assuming something about you, then they have created a narrative about you that then carries on through. And so in their heads, they have decided what their action is going to be based on the narrative that they have created about you. But if you do something unexpected that disrupts that narrative that they have created, which triggers then a focus, a switch from the focus on themselves and their inner narrative that they're just going to assume and ignore you, and forces their attention onto you. I know this is difficult, but it might feel like putting the spotlight on you is rarely the thing that people really like. But you think about it, it's the weird things. There's a lot of all the great stories through history, like Odysseus, the Odyssey. He doesn't survive because he's super strong, but he's tricky, right? Cunning, his differentness. One of the original and oldest, I don't know, is it the original? One of the oldest and original novels is a story called Don Quixote, and I don't know how many people are familiar with that story. But that's where the phrase "tilting at windmills" comes from. And so it's about this guy who kind of fancies himself a knight of the old of old style, like chivalrous, and he he goes about he kind of goes nuts, to be honest, and he begins riding his horse around doing these, what he views as great heroic acts of valor, charging down ogres and dragons and slaying them. And really, what he's doing is he's riding his horse around, and he's charging windmills and various things, and everybody thinks he's crazy. But in the process of doing this, he also makes great changes in the world around him. Anyway, so what are some action steps you can do to leverage your weird? Whether it's you want to sell something, whether it's you want to just make yourself feel better, whatever it is, how do you leverage the things, or recognize and put into action the things that are different about you? First and foremost, you got to name it. So here's your action. Write down 3 things that are uniquely you. Then you got to test it. Share something weird about you online, in a product, a conversation, a post about, hey, here's my strange hobby that I do that nobody else that I know does, right? Start small. Don't expect massive changes right off, but look for those interactions, those people who recognize your weird and enjoy it. Those are the people that you want to target, I guess, right? So then that's where a lot of the business advice that you see online about the whole niche down thing, right? Find your niche. That's how you find it. You find the weird thing, and then you do more of that thing. So then what's also really important with this is often that can feel like a critique, right? The criticism around, oh, you're so weird. But just because somebody else thinks that's weird, who cares, right? It's you. I recently shared a video, did a lot better than I expected it would, to be honest. But my wife was planting some carrots in a way that I hadn't seen before. She used some cornstarch and carrot seeds, and so I made a quick video of her doing it and posted it. And it just went bonkers on YouTube and TikTok. And most people were good about it. But the thing that stuck out to me the most was there was one person. Well, I guess there was a couple people who made the similar comment, but there was one person early on that criticized my wife for wearing bare feet in the garden. And there was almost as many comments in that post on TikTok that were calling that person out as there was in the whole rest of the video. There was that one thing that guy perceived as weird that then drew a huge community. Like, I think there was upwards of, there's like, I guess I could look. I think there's 400 or 500 comments on the video at this point. Maybe I'm combining YouTube and TikTok at this point, but guess I better look to give you the actual numbers. So there's 512 comments right now, almost 750,000 views on TikTok. And there are, where did it go? Last time I looked, there was closing in on 100 comments. I can't find it now because there's so many. But anyway, the weird part of the video, whether it was my wife's bare feet or the cornstarch and carrot seed, both of those were weird, and it just made that engaging for people because it changed the narrative of what they thought was going to happen. And then suddenly they were engaged. So if somebody says you're too whatever, that means you're different, which is probably good. And don't be harmful different, obviously. But, when it comes to that, kind of going on with this video, it's shocking how many people followed the social media accounts because of that video, You don't need to appeal to everyone. But there are the people who see the weird and go, hey, I want to be part of that weird. Anyway, weirdness. Leveraging your weird. Often, I mean, if it's harmful to you or to somebody else, then maybe that's a problem, not a benefit. But for the most part, weirdness isn't something to overcome. It's something to lean into. You know, I've talked with a few people on here about ADHD. I remember talking with Brian Houseworth, and he talked about how using of housemaid, he talked about using his weirdness, his ADHD. That was the thing that gave him the focus. He rode that wave of his quote unquote weirdness to the successful point that he's at now. You look at I'll look at a lot of the people who are so-called overnight successes. Those are the people who stopped pretending and started to kind of double down on what was different about them. So maybe ask yourself, how can I use the parts of me that I've tried to hide to create something that nobody else is able to? So here's your call to action, everybody. You've listened to me for a little bit. Hopefully you're still engaged and entertained, or at least I've provoked some thoughts. So why don't you share your weird with us? You can email questions@workshoptherapy.com or tag us on the social medias. And if you support this thought, share the message. And if you want to support the podcast, why don't you join up on Patreon? There's free levels that there's additional benefits to. If you like these sorts of information or dumps, then those are going to be becoming more prevalent on Patreon. And remember, write down those things that make you weird. And what makes you weird makes you valuable. So we'd like to thank all the patrons for supporting the podcast, especially the founding fathers. And they are Mr. Matthew from Argiano Serio, Brad of Brad's Customs, Keith Drennan of Blackthorn Concepts, Eric of Overall Makerworks, and Brandon Millichamp of Tectonic Creations. Really appreciate all of the support that you guys have given us. And we appreciate the support of everyone else who has joined and continues to support. Thank you, everybody. And keep it weird.